your stance on a God claim seems
Uh-huh.
to be, I mean, according to my poll, anyways, to be
Yeah.
in the minority.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
guess have you? Is that something that has made you feel uncomfortable, or is it the community? Has the community welcomed you? Have they been? I guess what are your thoughts on it? I guess thank you, Matthew, for agreeing to talk with me. We decided that we were gonna talk about uh, street epistemology, and you are a theist, and I just wanted to ask you some questions regarding that, I guess. So,
Yeah,
um,
that sounds great. Yeah, that's perfect. That's what I was expecting. And yeah, and if we have time at the end, I'd love to know more about like your story too. But yeah, I'm happy to answer any questions you have from my perspective on street epistemology, or how I got involved, or what I'm doing, what I like about it, or anything. So I'm totally open.
yeah, if we have time at the end, I'd be more than happy to answer a few questions. But if you do remember, next week on Tuesday, we were going to go live on what's the app called? Stereo?
Stereo. Oh,
Yeah.
okay, okay. So I misunderstood. For
Oh,
some
okay.
reason I was thinking that we were going to do both on one date, but I
Oh.
probably just didn't write down the right date. So yeah, that sounds great to me.
And now is the perfect time to tell everybody that the link in the description is to your stereo profile. So,
Oh, great. Awesome.
so if anyone wants to go out and check that out, it's a good place to go and listen to Matthew. And do you do only street epistemology on there, or do you do other things as well?
I've done a wide variety of things, and I'm planning on doing a couple of different things, but probably mostly street epistemology. I originally was watching some random YouTube video, and I think it was about geography actually. And the hosts of the YouTube show said, "Hey, we're going to be doing a live show on for street epistemology, or no, sorry, not street epistemology, on their topic, geography, on such a date." And I was like, "Oh, interesting, stereo. What's that?" So I went on it and checked it out, and I was like, "Wow, I actually really like. I love listening to podcasts,
Mhm.
and so it was fun to be able to listen to um, a um, a show that like you could leave comments, like you're listening to people live." um, and so I started listening to shows, and then I started, people invited me to do stuff, and I had random shows with people, and I realized that I gravitated towards asking people what they believed and why they believed it. I've talked to people who are Muslim, people who are atheist, people who are all different kinds of Christian backgrounds. I talked to one guy that's um, a non-practicing Jew, but grew up in a Jewish community, and then obviously the show you listened to was a man who's pagan, and so and I've actually talked to people who have like belief that the Earth is flat, or things about COVID-19, and so after a while of using it, like months of using it, kind of off and on, I kind of hit or miss. I'm not like consistent um, at it. I I was talking to Dolly, who's in the street epistemology community, and I was like, "Hey, well, first I told him you guys should use stereo. I'm not sure if anybody ever adopted it after I gave him that suggestion." And then I talked to him again a little while later, and I was like, "Well, what if I did street epistemology on stereo?" And so I started just recently, I guess, officially doing street epistemology. Um, so that's kind of how that got started on with stereo.
Very cool. Very cool. Yeah, I really like the app. It was really confusing at first, but after the little bit of a learning curve, it's really cool. It's a slick app.
Yeah, yeah. I feel like every app or platform has a learning curve, but once you get used to it, it's yeah. And there's a lot of features that you like. I don't think there are many apps that do that, like have live just audio shows. It's just kind of like a live radio show. So it is a little bit different, but once you get used to the format, it get becomes easier to use.
Okay, cool. So you kind of did this already, but in my notes I have a spot that allows you to introduce yourself. So I guess if you want to say anything that people may want to know about you.
Yeah, sure. So I live in Utah, in the United States, and I grew up here, and Utah is probably famous because of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, among a lot of other things. We have the Great Salt Lake, and um, we're near a beautiful range of mountains, the Wasatch Mountain Range, which is part of the Rocky Mountains. So it's a beautiful place to go hiking and camping, and there's a wide variety of uh, different sceneries. You can go to southern Utah that looks a little bit more like what you would expect in Arizona, or like the Grand Canyon, but that's just at the very south. And then you come up to the north where I am, and you can go up to the mountains where there's snow, um, at least a little bit of snow at all times of the year, but most of the snow comes in the winter, and it's really famous for skiing. We've got Park City, and the 2002 Winter Olympics were here. But anyway, that's the state that I live in. But members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So I grew up as a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Utah is where the church headquarters are. There are 16 million members of the church all around the world. Utah probably is one of the places with the highest amount of members of the church per capita. It's definitely not the place with the most members of the church. There's actually more members of the church outside of Utah. There are more members of the church, I think, in California actually than there are in the whole state of Utah. But California just has such a big population that there's probably more of a lot of different religions in California than other places. So, but per capita, it's about 60% of the population are members of the church. So I
Oh,
grew up that way. Yeah, it's a pretty high population here, but it depends on where you go. If you're in Salt Lake City, I think less than half the population immediately around Salt Lake City are members of the church. But if you go to areas like where I am in Davis County, or Provo, where Brigham Young University is, which is a church-owned school, then you'll get much higher percentages that are members of the church. So it just depends on where you are in the state. But uh, so I was raised a member of the church, grew up in the church, and when I was a young teenager is really when I felt convicted myself, to feel like, yeah, this is something I really do believe. And I had some of my own experiences that led me to that. I left and served as a missionary for the church when I was 19, and did that for a couple of years in West Virginia. So and then how I came across street epistemology is just a couple of years ago. Let's see, it would have been, yeah, it would have been maybe about 2 years ago. I came across the YouTube videos with missionaries, so the ties and white shirts and black name badges that came across the street epistemologist, and he started asking them questions, and I felt like their answers weren't my answers. I don't feel like they were good answers, but they were their answers. I'm not going to try to say every member of the church should have the same perspective on their beliefs, because there's a wide variety, just like in any religion, of
of
people who
course.
view things differently. But they weren't my answers. They weren't the way I would answer those questions. So I think there was a link in the description of the video, where I just looked it up, to Discord. So I joined Discord and started chatting with people, and Dolly Juggling Lessons asked me to go on his show, and it was really insightful and useful for me to be asked all those questions. And I went on his show a couple of different times, and I actually used street epistemology. I didn't call it that, but with my own, with some people close to me that had different opinions about politics and especially the coronavirus than I did. And it was really helpful to have a discussion that I don't feel like was combative, or I don't feel like anybody got really defensive, but it really helped me to see things from my other family members' perspectives better. And even I feel like I nudged them to be a little bit less extreme in their opinion. Not that I was nudging them to be less extreme in their opinion, but by going through the process of street epistemology, I think they became a little bit less extreme in their position. And hopefully they understood where I came from as well. And so I started finding street epistemology really useful. So that's probably more than what you wanted, but that's kind of the background of me, where I live, and how I got into street epistemology.
That's exactly what I wanted. That was great. Thank you. So that was really interesting actually to hear about I mean, everything was interesting, but specifically the population of members of the Church of Latter-day Saints in Utah. And I'm just going to kind of tie that in with one of the things that I wanted to actually talk to you about. And that, hey, it worked. Okay, I wasn't confident that was going to work. But a couple months ago, I put out a survey on the street epistemology subreddit.
Oh, okay.
And, yeah, so I asked the question, do you hold the belief that no God, any God, exists? And the wording may not have been the best there, but that's not the part that I'm really concerned about. So we have the majority being answering no, which would be agnostic atheist. The second most was yes, agnostic atheist, and the lowest percentage was theist. So I guess your stance on a God claim seems to be, I mean, according to my poll anyways, to be in the minority.
Yeah.
I guess, have you, is that something that has made you feel uncomfortable, or is it the community, has the community welcomed you? Have they been, I guess, what are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, that's a great question. Okay, so when I first watched this YouTube video with the missionaries, I checked out other videos as well with street epistemology, and to me, it seemed clear that at that time, at least, with the videos that I saw, that the street epistemologists were asking these questions because they really wanted people to evaluate their beliefs, and it seemed like they wanted to kind of nudge them away from theism. At least that was my perception, right?
Gotcha.
And then later, when I joined the Discord channel, I saw videos on a wide variety of topics. I saw videos on politics. I saw videos on vegetarianism. I saw videos on like just like science topics. And I was like, oh, okay, interesting. So street epistemology isn't necessarily about pushing somebody in one direction or another, but maybe more about using the Socratic method to really evaluate what we really believe. And so I began to see it as having such a wide variety of uses that I feel like I am definitely not uncomfortable at all at even evangelizing street epistemology, as much as I don't know if that's the right word, but even among some of my friends and coworkers who are members of the church, I've told them about street epistemology, and I've told people, like, I think everybody should be asked these questions because it really helps you to evaluate what you really believe and why you believe it, and maybe question things that you weren't sure about. I said this in a recent video with Dolly, but it's like, I think if you were to ask me when I was a missionary, if you were to ask me from the time I was like, I don't know, maybe 14 or 15 to the time I was like, I don't know, maybe 22, 23, maybe even 24. I'm 30 right now. But any time within that period of time, if someone was to say, how confident are you that your beliefs are true? I probably would have said 100%. I'm 100% sure that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is what it claims to believe, that the Book of Mormon is true. But I feel like I wouldn't say that now. I would say I'm confident that what I believe has legitimacy to it, but I'm definitely a lot more nuanced. I feel like I'm not as extreme in my opinions, and I'm definitely open to other perspectives. And also, I realize where kind of the pitfalls of some of my arguments are, and I think that's a good thing, because when we honestly recognize where we are and why we believe the things that we do, we can recognize where we need to collect more evidence and more data, or more experience to solidify our understanding better, or we can change and reevaluate what we believe, or maybe how extreme we were in certain things. And I think that's a really good thing for anybody to do, regardless of where they are in their perspective. And then, sorry, let me go back again. Am I talking too much? I have more of an answer, but I don't want to. I sometimes just blab on.
I mean, I do have more questions, but I mean, if you do want to continue on to elaborate, that's perfectly fine as well.
Okay, I'll say a few more things if that's okay. So also after I joined the Discord channel, I also looked a little bit more about street epistemology and found out that street epistemology, the term, at least I think, if I understand right, came from a man who wrote a book that was like the manual to creating atheists or something, right? And so I knew not right when I joined Discord, but I think it was shortly after that that I discovered that was the case. And so I think because my perception with the videos that I saw, and because of learning that, I think I was a little bit scared, just to be honest, and nervous. I was nervous about there being like hostility and combativeness, but after being in the community, and I haven't been super actively involved. I think it's been just recently, within the past few weeks, that I've started to really, since I've been wanting to create content, I've been engaging even more. But even before that, the whole time, as I've engaged more with people, I think I've felt very welcomed and I don't feel like, I feel like, yeah, there are people who feel very strongly about their perspective and how they feel on their side, but I don't feel like anybody has been arguing. And if I felt that people were just always trying to tear me away from what I believe, or they felt like, or I felt like people were making fun of what I believed, I don't think I'd be a part of it, because I don't. It's kind of, there's several different reasons for that, but one of the reasons is I know people. A man that I taught on my mission that was a Baptist, he became one of my really good friends. I still chat with him today every once in a while, and I'm friends with him on Facebook. His nephew, their church flew people to Utah during our worldwide church conference. It's called General Conference, and it happens twice a year, so that they could protest what was happening. So this was a Baptist group protesting Latter-day Saints and their conference, and arguing with people and trying to convince them that they're wrong. And I don't like that. I don't feel like a good way to try to help people understand your perspective is to actively protest them or try to convince them that they're wrong, especially right off the bat. I feel like that creates an environment that isn't beneficial to either side, for the most part, at least. And so if I felt like the street epistemology community was like that, I probably wouldn't be part of it. Maybe I would have joined the Discord server, and I felt like, oh man, I'm being attacked. That people, um, and I would leave. But I don't feel like that. And I'm happy to have discussions with people who I know disagree with my opinions, and we can discuss and we can ask questions with one another. And I think because of that culture, that's why I'm here. So I really appreciate that. And I think the thought left me. I was going to say something else, but I can't remember. But yeah, that's kind of so. Yeah.
Okay, terrific. So you did. I think you touched on this a little bit, but I'm going to ask anyways. With street epistemology, and you said you're doing the thing on stereo, and I think you are talking to people in your life. It sounds like. What are your goals with that?
Yeah, great question. So, I think it's multifaceted. I think I have multiple goals, but one sincere goal that I have is to understand different people's religions better. And even during that time in my life where I was like, I'm 100% confident, I still always loved learning what other people believe. So when I was a teenager, I invited a friend of mine who was non-denominational Christian to come to church with me, and he did. And I got a copy of the Book of Mormon for him, and we had multiple discussions, and he even met with missionaries for a little while. And I went to his church, and I loved that. And he plays, let's see, well, I don't know what church he goes to now because he's moved back and forth between California and Utah. Anyway, but for a lot of his life, he's played the guitar at his church. He plays the guitar. And so I loved going and listening to him play the guitar. My wife and I, when we were dating, we went to his church and listened to him play the guitar. There was a Presbyterian church that was right across the street from the church that I went to. And I just showed up one Sunday, and then I got to know the pastor a little bit. And then I got to know another friend that I really liked getting to know, and I went to their Sunday school. I went so many times that I think they kind of felt like I was kind of a little bit of a regular in some way, even though I wasn't Presbyterian. And it wasn't because I wanted to join their church because I felt confident in what I believed, but because I wanted to learn what they believe. The experiences that I've had and the convictions that I have about my faith really inform so much of my life. It helps me. It's useful to me from a psychological, mental, and even a physical perspective, and obviously a spiritual perspective. That it influences the way I live, the way I interact with other people. That I just naturally think that other people are influenced to that degree by their beliefs and their religion, and maybe it's not their religion as much, but maybe they have deeply held beliefs that affect the way they view the world, their worldview and their paradigm. And I want to understand that. I want to know where people are coming from. I went to a Buddhist temple as well. I have never been to a Muslim mosque no. I went to a Muslim Islamic center. It wasn't a mosque one time because I had a friend anyway, that's a whole nother story. And he invited me to a Ramadan celebration too. So yeah, I've been to a wide variety of different things. And so I think that's one reason that motivates me. And just one point on that too, that I think is really exciting about street epistemology is that I have had more conversations with atheists in the last couple of years than I ever had in my whole life, including on my mission. And I talked to a lot of people as a missionary, but I think the culture of West Virginia and Virginia was a lot of Pentecostal, Baptist. Some areas that I was in, there was a lot of Methodist people. So I talked to mostly people who had different religions, but I could probably, there was one man I remember that was really atheist that we loved going over to his house. But I hadn't talked to a lot of atheists, and because of street epistemology and some other experiences in my life, I've talked to a lot of atheists, and I have had misconceptions cleared up, and I am so grateful for that, because I had one view of atheism that was totally different than most of the people that I was meeting. And anyway, and I posted on Facebook and said things, and I had people like it and appreciate it, that that I was kind of clearing up some misconceptions. So I think that's one thing I really like about street epistemology, is just getting to know people, trying to understand their perspectives better. But I think another goal of mine as well is that I do like to have opportunities to share what I believe. I don't. I've really um, I feel like this has been even more enhanced and refined with me. I don't want to force anybody, coerce anybody, manipulate anybody, and even really convince anybody. I don't want to convince anybody that what I believe is right, or that they should come to my side. But I do want to share. I do want opportunities to share my perspective and what I believe. And people can take that how they will. And if that leads somebody to reading the Book of Mormon and learning more, then that'd be wonderful. I'd love that. But yeah, I don't think it's my job to try to convince people to believe what I believe, but I do like to share. And so, and I know street epistemology isn't necessarily a place for that, but if I end up like meeting people and they want to know more, then I think that's great. I think that's wonderful, and it helps, I think, educate people about my perspective and my beliefs as well. So I think that's another piece of it. Yeah, I would say, and I just really like talking too. I like talking to people.
Sure.
So anyway, that's yeah, I think those are all the main reasons that I like street epistemology.
Do you think for a lot of your reasons, do you think they're the same as most people in the SE community, or do you think that they're different than most of the people, their reasons?
I don't know. Like I said, my perception of watching the first few videos that I did was that
Mhm.
people were trying to use a technique to convince people that God doesn't exist.
Mhm.
But I don't think that's the case for everybody. And if that is the case for some people, and I don't know, I'm not sure what the percentages would be of who that would be. I don't have any problems with that. I think it's a good thing for other people to have civil discussions and do it in a way where you're seeking to understand the other person's perspective. And so for anybody in the SE community who um, who who wants to convince me to be an atheist, I don't have any problems with that. But I don't know. I I genuinely feel like some of the people that I've met, they are trying to make the world a more civil place and to have more open dialogues and to get rid of divisiveness, which I absolutely support as well. Actually, that would maybe be another reason that I like SE2, is because I want to learn to have those conversations, to bring people together with different backgrounds, and to like show how nuanced people can be, and that we have more in common than we do different. And I really do believe that. I believe that most people have more in common than they have differences. Obviously, our physical bodies, most people have eyes and nose and mouth and fingers and toes, right? I mean, the percentage of our differences, the percentage of our genome, right, that's different, is far smaller than the percentage of our common genes. And if you take that further to not just a physical thing, but like a mental and psychological and even people's deeply held beliefs, I think at the core, I think we have more in common than we have different. And I think we argue too much about those differences instead of building common ground. So, but anyway, to answer your question, I don't know what other people's intentions are exactly. That's just my perception of people's intentions. I think there's a lot of wide variety of different um, different people with different backgrounds, and if we got at the core of things, I think we probably would have more in common than we have different. But I don't know. I'm not sure why everybody else is in the SE community.
Sure. Hey, maybe I should do a poll on that.
Yeah, that'd be interesting to see.
All right. Now, for the next few questions that I have, I took a bunch of criticisms of street epistemology, and most of them are, actually all of them, I should say, are from a theist perspective on that, all the criticisms.
Okay.
So, yeah, I suppose I can just kind of get your perspective on that and see what you think of whether they're true or not.
Okay.
Well, I guess technically all these are questions, so it won't be like a true or false thing. But anyways, so first thing I wanted to ask was, are the questions street epistemology practitioners? I don't know what to call us. Is that the best term? Street epistemology practitioners? Street epistemologists?
Yeah, I've heard. I listened to a recent show, like a panel show at some point that was on the SC, one of the main YouTube channels, where they're kind of discussing that a little bit in the language and what it's called. And someone made the point, which I thought was really insightful, is like terms might change as time goes on, but the objectives of street epistemology like inform everything and what it is. So I think street epistemologist practitioner sounds good, but street epistemologist sounds good too. I don't know. I don't have a preference.
Okay. Well, for the rest of this, I'm just going to say SEP for street epistemology practitioner.
Okay. So, and do you have a preference on what or?
I go back and forth. I have no idea. Like,
okay.
I don't know. I think we got to come up with something new, maybe. Okay. Anyways, I'll restate the question here. So, are the questions SEPs ask when examining faith fair questions to ask?
Yeah, I from my perspective, I don't think I have heard a question that's unfair but I'm kind of the opinion that I think fairness and I think it depends on how you define fairness, right? There's a couple different ways to define fairness. It's like one way to define fairness might be related to equality, but I think the definition of fairness that I gravitate to more would be a definition about following expected rules. So if there's a rule or a law in a country and you've established these rules and you violate those rules, you violate those laws, that's unfair, that's unjust. And if the laws themselves are unfair or unjust according to some higher moral standard that everybody agrees to, then the law should be adjusted to be more fair, right? So that's how kind of I would determine fairness. And so unless there's some kind of rule book somewhere or some kind of like unless and the United States at least has very open free speech laws, so I don't consider much unfair from that perspective. But I guess it depends on how you define fair. But what
if I used the word ethical instead? Would that change anything?
Yeah.
Or would that be pretty much the same?
That's interesting. That's really interesting because I have heard people discuss about the ethics of challenging people's deeply held beliefs a little bit, not very much. I haven't dove into it a lot. And I think the little bits that I've heard is that it could potentially, and I don't know what the research on this says, this is just things that I've heard other people say, so I'd have to really look into this. But I've heard people say that if you challenge somebody's beliefs to, or that's not the right word. If something that you do creates a major crisis in somebody's life, right? And that could be a faith crisis, for example, that I've heard people argue that you should be ethically responsible to also help them have the tools to be able to overcome that in their life, because that could be really psychologically damaging. And for people who are deeply tied to their religious communities, it can be socially damaging. And so I think from an ethical perspective, I think as long as you're doing it from the perspective that you are also able to provide people the resources that they need if they end up with a major faith crisis, then I think it's totally ethical. I think it's fine. But I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I don't know what the research says on that. So does the research shows that people that go through a faith crisis, I don't know the right words, but they end up questioning their beliefs in God and end up leaving their religious communities, that they are in major psychological harm, or they could go through some like difficult, I don't know, I'm not sure. And it probably depends on the person's religion as well. But from my perspective and my viewpoint, I don't feel like I have been harmed by questions. I feel like questions are a good thing. So from my perspective, I think they're great. And I think the way street epistemology approaches it is that you're not you're not you're doing it from a perspective of allowing them to explore and for them to answer the question. So um, it's a really safe space. So yeah, I'd have to think about that more. But from my perspective and my experience, I feel like they're totally fair and totally ethical. I haven't had any problems with it, and I've even advocated for it for people that in my own community who are religious friends and coworkers and others that are very deeply believing and religious. And I don't feel like any that's been psychologically damaging to anybody that I've talked to, at least not that I can tell. So
Cool. Just kind of off the top of my head, would you ever have a street epistemology conversation with someone from your church, like about the claim of God?
yeah, oh for sure. Actually, one of my friends that I that I was telling you about, that I was talking to about with street epistemology, and that somebody close to me, that I told them that I was starting to officially do street epistemology on YouTube or stereo, and that I had and I talked to them about it before. They actually came to me and they're like, "Hey, would you do it with me?
Oh,
Would you question my beliefs?" I was like, "Yeah, totally, I'll do that." So that might be a stereo show coming. I'll let you know. But yeah, absolutely, I would.
cool.
It's not something like um, it's it's not something that I would like at church be like, "Hey guys, we should do this." Like I don't think it's the place for church, but
Right,
there
right.
are some times when people make claims at church or in Sunday school that I'm like, even like from a scriptural perspective, that doesn't make much sense. Like I think that in my head sometimes. And so I think there are some contexts even at church where I don't think you say, "Hey, I'm doing straight epistemology with you," but I think where you're using the Socratic method and you're asking people questions, I think that's a good thing. Unfortunately, at our church, I think there is a culture that asking certain kind of questions, especially at church, is like bad. And I don't feel that way.
Mhm.
But I feel like we kind of have that culture, and it's probably not unique to our church. Probably that's people in a lot of different religions do. So I think sometimes it might be most appropriate to do it outside of church, but I would definitely not be opposed to doing it with people who are members of my faith. Yeah.
Cool. That's awesome. Next question is, do SCPs assume a definition of faith?
On the videos that I've seen, yes, I think so. But I also don't think that it is like overt and explicit. I think people are trying to be as neutral as possible. And for the most part, the videos that I've seen, people are letting the interlocutor define what faith means and using their own definition, and going from there. So I think that's awesome, and that's great. But I do think that there is kind of a hidden assumption of what all religious people define as faith, and I think you can almost find as many different definitions of faith as you can different kinds of faiths that there are, right? Different kinds of religions or spiritual beliefs. And so it is good not to assume that you think that what the other person sees as faith. My definition of faith personally is, I think, probably different than most people. And I would feel pretty confident to say that it's different than what most people in my own faith would define as faith. I was actually listening to a scripture study podcast this year in church. We're studying the Old Testament, and so there's this podcast that I like to listen to, and they had a point in there where they defined faith, and I was like thinking to myself, yeah, that's so close, but that's not quite how I define faith, and that's okay because we all have different definitions of what that means. So,
okay, cool. Is SE evangelizing?
Well, according to what I've officially read on like streetepistemology.com, streetepistemology.com, and also what the panel shows that I've listened to where they talk about defining what street epistemology is and what the goals of street epistemology are, I would say no. Does that mean that some people don't use it as a tool to evangelize their theism or atheism? No, I think there probably are people that do, but if you're using street epistemology according to, I think, the official definitions that I've heard, I would say no, it's not evangelizing. It's I think the goal seems to be to get people to reflect on what they believe and why they believe it and what their epistemology is, and hopefully to refine their beliefs based on better reasoning. And I don't think that's evangelizing. I think that can be done with anything, and I think it's a good thing to be done with anything, and I think it can lead to multiple conclusions depending on the amount and type of evidence that you have. So my personal belief is, and that I would call this a strongly held belief and conviction. I have a strong degree of confidence in it, but I can't prove it very well, is that there is an objective reality, that there is truth regardless of me, right? Like the Tic Tac example in so many of the videos, like the number of Tic Tacs in here, we can come to an agreed shared understanding, and not even just an agreed shared understanding. That's like the reality of it. That's the number of Tic Tacs that there are in the Tic Tac container. and that's not dependent on me. It's not dependent on what I believe. It's not dependent on what you believe. It's not dependent on what anybody else believes, that there is a real truth. And so ideally, all of us, regardless of what we believe on something, the more evidence that we collect and the more experiences that we have and the more research that's done, the closer, hopefully, that we'll get to what that truth is. But there are some topics that we don't know, and definitely don't know with certainty. And so I think street epistemology is a way to get closer to what that is. But because there are so many areas that we don't have enough data on, different people can come to differing conclusions based on the amount of evidence they have and the type of evidence that they have. And they may feel strongly one way or another, but hopefully as we continue to use practices like street epistemology and the scientific method and research and other techniques, that we'll get closer to what that truth actually is. And I think that's one grand hope of street epistemology. But that's
Okay, awesome. It's so awesome to get your perspective on all these things. Next question is SE scripted?
I think it can be, and I don't necessarily think that is a bad thing all the time. For example, if the goal of advertising is to get you to buy a product, can you see an ad that is pretty universal in convincing people to buy the product? And was it effective, even though it's the same ad over and over again? Yeah, it can be. But maybe the most effective thing to do is to like word of mouth advertising, where you're having like a individual conversation with somebody that you know and trust, or that you develop rapport with, and you can really get at the heart of why they would use that product, right? But it doesn't mean that other methods can't also be effective and have a place. So I have learned from conversations with you and several other people that street epistemology, maybe in its best form and its most ideal form, shouldn't be so prescriptive and scripted, and that you don't have to always ask the same questions. And I appreciate that, and I do think there is merit to that. And I think that if you're really trying to get at the heart of what an individual believes, then having it super prescriptive and scripted isn't going to be the best way to go. But if somebody is using a script, or they are using a set of questions and they do go in a particular order, can it still be effective? Yeah, I think so. So I guess my answer to that question is yes, it can be prescriptive. Maybe is it more effective not being prescriptive? I would think so. But is it bad if somebody uses a scripted approach? No, I don't think so. Especially if they're starting off and they're trying to learn how to go. I think that can be a good tool to use for learning, and also if you're nervous or forget things. Yeah.
Well, you convinced me.
Oh.
No, I don't know, but yeah, cool. That was interesting.
Yeah. And that would be interesting research to be done too. Like, is there data on, like, if you are using a script, if you did, like, if you sent a questionnaire, and this probably wouldn't perfectly get at the results that you want, but if you sent a questionnaire to people who, after using a scripted approach, and then maybe a week later, and then after not using a scripted approach, which ones are more likely to rate that they actually seriously reflected on it, or they're more likely to change their perspective or change their opinion or change their reasoning. It'd be interesting to see which one actually is more effective. And I would guess that a non-scripted approach would be more effective typically, but
That'd be my guess too.
But I think it can still be effective outside of that.
All right, I got 2 more questions. You got time for 2 last questions?
Oh yeah, I've got time.
All right, cool. Does an SCP assume superior epistemology?
I hope not. They might. I try not to take that perspective. And I think we all have biases, and I think we all naturally assume that we have good reasons to believe what we believe. And so I think it's natural to feel like, especially when you're starting off in a conversation, to feel like, oh, I have really good reasons to believe and this person doesn't. But I think that street epistemology can cause the practitioner to question their own beliefs or their own reasons for believing, or to modify. And I think that's a good thing. I think you should go into the conversation from that perspective. But I think street epistemologists, street epistemology practitioners, and anyone, I think anyone naturally goes into a conversation. I think this is just a natural human tendency, thinking that they have really good reasons to believe what they believe, and maybe better reasons than somebody else. But I think a really great street epistemology practitioner finds ways to mitigate that in themselves, so that they can learn from the conversation as well. But as a criticism against street epistemology, I don't think that's a criticism against street epistemology. I think that's just a criticism against human nature. I think we all do that. And so that's something we all are striving to overcome. So anybody who says that that's unique to street epistemology, I think we should all maybe look into what the research says and maybe really evaluate what we're claiming. I mean,
yeah, I'm on board with you. I think that's more of a human nature thing than anything. Yeah, I think we all think we're right, or at least on the things that we are, on deeply held beliefs. We're going to have that high degree of confidence, and so I'm on board with you. Actually, I've agreed with you on almost, I think, like many things, almost pretty much everything. So we're pretty much on the same page. So I left pretty much the best question for last.
Okay.
At least I think it's the best question. It's the most interesting anyway. Is SC an attack on religion, or specifically Christianity?
Well, again, going back, according to the definitions that I've recently read, or the conversations I've had, the shows that I've watched, I would say no to that, because that's not a stated objective that I've heard from the street epistemology community, at least not recently, that's an objective. So now, did it start that way? Maybe. I mean, I guess the book, I haven't read the book, but A Manual for Creating Atheists sounds like it's a manual for creating atheists, right?
Yeah.
So did the people who begin to practice street epistemology, or really kind of pioneered it, was that their intent? I don't know. I don't know. I don't know enough to know that. Obviously, I don't know if it's so much, just based on what I know, I don't know if it was so much an attack on a particular religion as much as it was trying to get people to see things from their perspective and maybe change their beliefs and hope that they would adopt their perspective that God doesn't exist. But yeah, so did it start like that, or are there people who do want to attack religion and attack Christianity? Yeah, sure, I'm sure there are, but according to the objectives that I've seen and what I've read about, I would say that wouldn't be that wouldn't align with that. I think maybe if any kind of evangelizing could align with it, it would be, we want to evangelize people adopting good reasons for what they believe, and maybe we can go further to say we want people to adopt the best reasons that are aligned with the best data that we have. That's what we want people to adopt. But yeah, and again, like I said at the beginning of the show, I'm not, if there are people who are evangelizing atheism, I don't have any problems with that, because I think the method and the community, I don't feel attacked. I feel like I'm in a safe space, and I feel like I've learned a lot about atheism and about myself and about other people's religions, and so I don't have a problem with somebody wanting to evangelize atheism and using street epistemology as a way to potentially help them in doing that. I don't think there's any problems with that, as long as I guess if somebody steps away from street epistemology and starts being combative, then I guess that's kind of outside of the realm of what street epistemology is, at least right now, what's working. And so, but yeah.
Okay. That is all the questions I had for you. If there's any questions you want to ask me, I'll allow that as well.
Okay, well, awesome. I don't know if you want to have a conversation about your journey or perspective, or save that for a stereo show next week, which works as well. But I think those would be the only questions I would have. Let me think for a minute, though, to see if I have any questions on this topic, on street epistemology and theism and atheism. Maybe okay, I thought of a few questions. Do you feel like there's any problems? Well, so I guess I kind of have two questions. Do you feel like there's any problems with more theists adopting street epistemology? And then the other question would be, do you feel like anybody in the SE community has problems with more theists potentially adopting street epistemology?
To answer your first question, no. I think it is absolutely terrific to have theists as a part of the community. I'd like to see that happen a lot more. I think that there's a lot of beliefs, specifically, probably globally, but especially in the United States, that have absolutely nothing to do with theism, atheism, nothing. It's completely unrelated. And I think that's causing a lot of problems for the world and us as a country. So I think having theists come in and be a part of the community, I think that can only be a good thing. I don't see any problems there.
Cool.
And even in regards to any other belief in general, if you hold a belief about a conspiracy theory, I think you should be welcomed into the community too. I don't think your beliefs and any confidence that you may hold in those beliefs, I don't think that should be a restriction for joining the community.
Cool. And I love that. And I think, like I said too, even if it was a space where people were like being combative, I keep using that word, but being divisive, being argumentative, I feel like you probably wouldn't, like, even in your poll, I was actually surprised, even though the vast majority of people in the SE community that you polled are atheists. I was actually surprised to see that there were that many theists. And I think it's a good thing, because if it was a space where theists felt like they were being attacked, I don't think you'd see that many theists in there. And if if atheists are, at least Gnostic atheists are right in their claims, if a Gnostic atheist is making a claim that God doesn't exist, then hopefully you would want more theists in your community, so that you have more opportunities to ask them questions and help them to question their beliefs and hopefully come to your perspective. And so you don't want to create a community that's only open to atheists, because you wouldn't get people who have different views. Yeah, well, that's awesome. That's really good to know. Do you feel like most SE practitioners feel that way?
I think so. I I think most do. Are there some that don't feel that way? Maybe. I I really can't say. I think the vast majority feel the same way I do. But I mean, in any community anywhere, there's always those few outliers. So there probably are a few out there that you know
Yeah.
are the have differing thoughts on the matter. But
Yeah.
yeah.
One thing I'll just say real quick is that one of the things that I've been corrected on is that in the atheists that I've talked to and the people that I've met over these past couple of years, and how many times I've been corrected on this. Or I guess not corrected on this. I guess I've been corrected on it once, and then how many times it's been like reiterated. Um, I've learned that not all atheists, maybe even most atheists, but I don't know. I don't know if there's a poll on this, are not actively making a claim that God does not exist. Um, and if it's not most atheists, at least is a good portion of atheists. I mean, you showed the percentage of people who are Gnostic versus agnostic atheists, and that was something that I corrected my own friends and family about, and I'm so grateful that I've met people, because I think the perception that I had of atheists when I was a teenager, and even as a missionary, and beyond, and was that theists are like these people who I didn't feel like they were evil or anything. I feel like, are there some atheists that are bad, evil people? Sure, just like there are some theists that are bad, evil people, right? But I didn't feel like anybody was evil, but I did have the perception that atheists were actively trying to tear down religion and actively trying to convince people that God doesn't exist. And I've been corrected on that over and over again, that it's like, yeah, atheists may feel strongly about some things, but that doesn't mean that they're all trying to tear people down. And also that there are a lot of atheists that are like, I feel like, hopefully I'm representing some of the people that I've talked to. Obviously not everybody, but there are a lot of atheists who take the perspective that I feel like it's unreasonable to believe that God exists. I don't make a claim that God doesn't exist. God could exist. I don't know, but I don't feel like it's reasonable to believe that God exists. And so I am going to live my life and act in a way as if God doesn't exist. And that's totally a different perspective than my perception was, that most atheists were not just not living in a way that God doesn't exist, but they were actually actively making claims that God didn't exist and trying to convince everybody that God doesn't exist. And yeah, are there atheists in that category? Yeah, but I'm really glad that I've been corrected on that, because it's totally changed my perception, and I've corrected my own friends and family on that, and helped them to see things from an atheist perspective, or at least some of the atheists that I know a little bit better. So that's been a good thing.
Yeah, you are totally not alone in that assumption previously. So just know that there's a lot of people out there that had that same kind of thinking that you previously had. So no need to even feel bad about that or anything. So yeah, and I think your representation, I think that was probably pretty accurate for most. So good job.
I had another question. Now I can't remember. Yeah, but yeah, I think if I can think of those other questions, I'll ask. But I think the only other questions I can think of right now are just kind of more about you and your journey and stuff like that. But if you want to save that for next week, then that's great with me too.
Yeah, it is. It's not super lengthy, but more than time than I'd like to spend right now, anyways. Because all right, thank you so much again, Matthew. It was really interesting hearing your perspective on all this. It's really great to ask these questions to someone who comes from the opposite side of the spectrum. So that's totally cool.
Well, I appreciate it. I appreciate having gotten to know you a little bit so far, and I'm excited to talk to you more next week. It's been like, thank you for being so welcoming too. And answering my questions. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, you're welcome. Any more questions you got, just let me know, and I'll do my very best to answer what I can.
Awesome. Thanks.
All right. Till next time. I'll see you next Tuesday.
Okay. See ya.
See ya.